Hey everyone, I'm super excited today to present our next guest for Founder Stories. Today we have the honor to host our dear friend Omar. Omer has been the CEO of a phenomenal company called Vervoe. Not only that, he has a phenomenal story where growing up from the young age of 4, he's already been a world traveler, living in 2 different continents. He's been served in the IDF, in the Israeli Defense Force, and he has an incredible story of how he overcame obstacles and hurdles in his personal life and also who he became the man he is today. I'm very excited to have him here with us to tell us the story of Vervoe, his own personal story, where he got to where he is now, and the lessons we can learn along the way and apply it to our own life. So, Omar, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
So, Omer, let's take it all the way back. A young boy that grew up in Australia, then all of a sudden moved back to Israel, ended up in Israel, moved back to Australia. What's with all this moving back and forth and everything over there?
So my parents had this idea that we should live overseas. I was born in Israel, and I was 4 years old, and they had this idea that we should live overseas for a period of time. And my father got an opportunity to work to run a company in Australia, and they thought it would be good for us. And the plan was to move for 3 years, and three turned into seven and a half. And so I ended up spending most of my childhood from the age of 4.5 to the age of 12 in Melbourne, so primary school, or what you call elementary school in the US. And because it's the Southern Hemisphere, the seasons are the opposite. So school
Mm-hmm.
starts, in March, and the opposite side of the year. So when I moved back at the age of 12 to Israel, I'd only done uh, half of grade 6, and then I went straight into grade 7. I skipped half, and that sort of always that haunts me, because I sometimes when I think about what's wrong with me, I think, well, that's because I missed 50% of grade 6. If only I'd done that. So sort of moved around, and really it's a culture shock.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone who spent time in the Middle East, anywhere in the Middle East, and Israel in particular, knows that it's a bit of a jungle.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bit of a sort of marketplace kind of flea market mentality, and it's kind of Australia's kind of like more European, particularly Melbourne, a bit more British. People might get upset at me saying this, but a bit more civilized, and I think I can say that as an Israeli. And so you sort of it is a culture shock in both directions. In Australia, people think that like I'm this kind of like crazy guy that talks with
Mm-hmm.
his hands and animated, and then you go to sort of Israel, and you don't understand why people don't line up for anything. They just push everyone out of the way and talk with their hands. So as a kid, it knocks you about a little bit, but it's also it completely takes you out of that sort of sheltered upbringing, and you get to see fundamentally different perspectives on life, different cultures, languages, different ways of thinking about the world. And at the time, you don't appreciate it, but later in life, I think it's really helpful to have that perspective. And obviously, I was fluent in English. Reading and writing in 2 languages can be, is really, really helpful as well.
Right. Sure. So when you moved to Israel at 12, did you know Hebrew?
I did, because my parents made me keep up Hebrew, and also I went to a Jewish school. But I was kind of like rusty, and the kids at school immediately kind of branded me as Australian, which to them was a place where there are kangaroos. They had no idea what that was about, and so took a little bit of time to sort of get myself back into the sort of proper Israeli slang.
I can only imagine, as a 12-year-old, going into a whole new country, a whole new place. And like you mentioned, I love the example that Israel's one big flea market. It totally is. In a sense, everyone's trying to handle you, the word handle, like, get you for something over there, or they're either going to sell you something, Dead Sea products, or something else in your classroom or something. But they're always trying to get that. So it must have been the culture shock you had a 12-year-old child. It must have been like crazy. Thank God you've been able to overcome it through multiple years of therapy. Seems like, which is a great thing. But but how is such an experience living in two different places. Like you said before, you have the Israeli part, which is all the chutzpah and moving away and moving it with your hands and everything, and then the Australian part, which is more civil. How has that shaped you from a young child? Looking back now and everything.
I think kids generally struggle with things that are different. And I think as adults, we become more open and we seek difference and diversity. Whereas for kids, most kids are xenophobic, not maliciously, but they kind of, everything's mean reverting. And if you're a little bit different, then that's a reason to pick on you. Or and I think so on the downside, there's a little bit of that. I think on the upside, there are just so many benefits, and we're seeing it now. I mean, the world is so much smaller today with the internet and social media, which was just starting to exist, not social media, but the internet when I was growing up. And so now, I think the benefits are undoubted around the interconnectivity and you can work from in different countries. There's so much more mobility today. So then in a world with less mobility than today, certainly in terms of technology, I think it was a huge benefit for me as a child to have another language, particularly English, to have a different perspective, another reference point that, well, it doesn't have to be like this. Right. It can be different. And that's not necessarily to say it's good or bad, but society can organize itself differently to dream about something different. Not just, and Israel is very influenced by the US. That's not always a good thing. Sometimes it's a good thing, depends what. And so to have another perspective that there's another part of the world can be really beneficial in terms of thinking about what you aspire to, what kind of career you want, what kind of values, even just how you conduct yourself and how you speak, how you communicate.
Yeah, for sure. So that's totally true and totally credible. Having that first of the open-mindedness, to be able to experience that open-mindedness, able to see from two different points of views, because essentially it's totally two different ways of thinking, totally two different ways. The Israeli way, the American way, for example, Australian way, and and the way how they conduct business and the way how they approach startups and the way everything, Israel, and the way it's phenomenal what's going on in the innovation, what they have, all the startups and everything that's going on over there, and the amount of money. I just read a report this morning. The past quarter, $5 billion was invested into startups over there, which is absolutely phenomenal for such a tiny little country. But I want to move further in your storyline. You go to Israel, you obviously end up in the army. Typically, you end up in the tank platoon. You become a sergeant, if I'm not mistaken. And I read somewhere in a phenomenal story, and I'd love you to hear the story, because this really shows on something that we can really apply together back into our startup life, and for entrepreneurs, for team members, and this is really what culture represents. And I'd love to hear from your own mouth. There's a story that you were going through, I think, some type of drilling to be a captain. And there was somebody within the platoon that was able to do the course and thrive in the course. He's able to finish before everyone else. But what he did was, there was other team members that were not able to do it, and he went back to help them. Are you able to tell us more about that story and how that are able to apply that directly to our own life with team members, within culture, within companies, and we're able to tie that back into what you're building and everything?
Yeah, I think if I'm not mistaken, the story you're referring to was in officer school, yeah. And there was where they mix. So when you become an officer, there's a general officer school that everyone in the entire military has to go through, no matter what unit you're from, no matter if it's combat, non-combat. And then you go to a specific course that typically takes 4 months that's specific to your practice or unit. So for me, it was tanks. So you actually learn to become a practitioner to lead a tank platoon. But in the general officer school, it's leadership, essentially, how to lead a team and how to be a commander in the military. And so what they do is they mix people from different units. And that's the only time in the military that you'll have people from all different parts of the military together: special forces, tanks, infantry, like all sorts of things, intelligence, with different abilities, different levels of fitness, different physical abilities, mental capacity, etc. And by mental capacity, I don't mean sort of in the clinical sense. I just mean sort of mindset and having pushed themselves to different places in their experience. And one of the things you have to pass, which is it's a pass-fail hurdle, and is an obstacle course. And it's just one of those things. I'm not sure that being able to do an obstacle course in a certain amount of time makes you a better leader, but
Right.
it's to kind of prove that you can get to a certain level of competence with your physical ability and fitness and mental toughness, and you just need to be able to do these things. It's like basic level of competence, and it's actually very challenging. And you're doing obstacles, you sprinting through it. You're wearing a full pack, and uh, most people don't pass the first attempt. You have 3 attempts, and if you can't do it in 3, you're out of it. You're out of it. You failed officer school. And there was this one guy who was a special forces guy, but you never would have guessed it. My size, I know you can't see on Zoom, but like I'm a small guy and skinny and not tall. And this guy was the same size, friendly, came from the countryside. I think just a really just lovely, gentle person, but absolute killer. And he is not what you expect when you think commando. It's just not who you picture. And he kind of like took this other person under his wing. I don't know why. This really kind of nerdy person who didn't come from a combat background. He made him run laps on the weekends, and he made him like do all these things. And yeah, like in the obstacle course, this other guy struggled, and the elite special forces guy basically sprinted through it. For him, it was nothing. Ran back and did the whole thing again with the other guy to just like, and you're not allowed to physically help, but just to basically encourage him. And it might sound like a cliche, but I got to tell you, like, you can't not be inspired when you see kind of stuff. Like, it's pure encouragement, it's selflessness, and it's the things that get people through the tough kind of obstacles, and literally an obstacle course. And this is now 20 plus years later, and I'll never forget it. You asked how it applies. I think there are many instances in our lives where we can potentially not just help someone else, but forego, the sort of glory or recognition to help someone else get across the line, and not do it for credit. There's no reward at the end. It's just to help another person get through, and then nobody ever talks about it, and that's it. And that's like, those are the little things that make the world go round, I think. I'd like to think.
No, for sure. The ultimate charitable giving is giving in the sense of like, non-recognizable charity, like, not knowing who gave it. But I love that. And like, that's chosen real leadership. And like, for someone that's a startup founder or an entrepreneur, or even just someone that's leading a team, and that's the biggest thing. Like, I love to hear, like, your principles of leadership. I'm sure you learned a ton from the army that you probably apply now, into your day-to-day life. And I don't know if your day-to-day life, but in your business life and leading a team. But I love to hear, like, how as a leader can you uplift your team members, help them become the best potential within themselves?
Yeah, that's a big question. And I don't know that I do it well, and certainly not all the time. But there are a few things. There is something about human psychology that is common to any environment,
Right.
a startup, corporate, military, whatever. People want to feel that they're part of something that's bigger than themselves. Okay. And that doesn't have to be something that is social impact, saving the world. It's just bigger than themselves.
Mm-hmm.
They want to be part of something. That's why people do, bike rides as a group. It's not because they're bored. It's not, if they're bored, they can watch TV. It's because they want to be part of something,
Right.
even something small. And certainly in a startup, that can be very compelling to be part of a mission. But the mission is not just something that's written on a piece of paper. It's, do you, in your day-to-day work, have a sense that you're making a difference? So one of the things that we do is every week we remind everyone of the impact that they've had. We write a little update and we say, thanks to you, X and Y happened. A candidate now that otherwise would have been overlooked got an opportunity for with this job, or this company that was previously using resumes is now doing this, or we hired this person that otherwise wouldn't have been interested in joining us because they got excited about this thing that you made. And it's to bring back to people the reminder that, yeah, you're not just like shipping code or selling deals or whatever. You are part of something. You're making a real impact on people's lives. And that, at the end of the day, that is at an individual level. So everyone is motivated differently. Okay. So we're not saying to them, we're not choosing for them. We're just kind of amplifying the impact, and then they can choose which thread to pull on, what resonates with them. And people get excited about different things. Some people are excited about building a website that people use, and they're excited that people click on it because they made the button. And other people are excited that there's a social impact. And so it's my job to help them see the power of what they're doing and what they could be doing. And hopefully that inspires them to then do the best work that they can do. In the military, it's a different context, but at the end of the day, in the military, there are a lot of similarities because people fundamentally don't want to be there because they're exhausted, they're homesick, and they're getting pushed to their physical and mental limits. And there's a myth that the military is run through commands and orders. That hardly ever happens. It's generally a very broad spectrum of kind of suggestions and encouragements to not get to the point where you're compelling people to do things. And so a good military commander can basically get people to see the goal and what we need to achieve and why it's in their interest to achieve it together with their teammates, and almost have them do it in your absence. So I would always say that like my leadership should be judged when I'm not looking, when I'm not there. Are they actually, as soon as I turn it, all going to slack off, or are they actually just going to know what needs to be done? Am I instilling the right standards and behaviors and values? And that's what I try to do. And that's no different to running a company.
No, for sure. And in that sense, what it goes down to, boil down to culture. Building a culture where people, like you mentioned, feel part of something. Feel bigger than them. That's we're always, as in life, especially now in the 21st century. We're seeking with technology, as much as the benefits of technology, it also disassociated us with people, essentially being able to connect with people on a personal level, being able to connect to specific types of things. It's all about posting on Instagram. It's all about the other side. The grass is green on the other side type of process over there. But being able to create that culture, I love that aspect of it you're mentioning over there. Creating something bigger than yourself, bigger than we. So going down to that aspect, I'd love to, give us tell us about, your beginning journey of Vervoe, when you obviously just found the company, and, the company was founded off your own pain point that you experienced together with your co-founders. So give us the brief intro, but I'd love to get into the difficult times at the beginning of Vervoe. When you wake up in the morning and you're like, holy hell, this is, are you going to be able to keep the lights on today, or you're not? The difficult challenges that you went through and how you overcame that.
Yeah, so the story, David, my co-founder, technology background, and he also ran a bakery. So true entrepreneur, not just in a tech sense, but actually like ran a proper business, which I don't think many people can say in tech. And I grew, as we've discussed, grew up in Israel, served in the military. I worked in banking for most of my career after going to law school, and I worked for the Australian Red Cross 2 years coordinating international emergency aid. And so I've also had sort of a mixed career across different contexts, humanitarian, military, corporate. And the commonality was that both of us sort of learned that we had multiple experiences where we saw that there's this dislocation between the sort of, in David's case, people who went to Stanford on the one hand, and on the other hand, self-taught technologists. And there's this dislocation between like how how decisions made in hiring traditionally and what someone can actually contribute. And typically the signals that are interpreted often are more reflective of privilege than they are of capability. Mm-hmm. And in my case, I saw that many times. I was leading a big team in banking, and the top performers were not the ones from the schools you'd expect. And I also personally came to Australia. I had like officer in the military, worked at startups, went to the best school in the country. And then in Australia, I was like some guy without a degree from the Middle East whose name no one could pronounce. So all of a sudden, worth something, worthless. How does that happen? And so this issue really burnt us. At the same time, David and I got involved with a film, and we sort of opened our eyes to the movie business. The movie industry is fascinating. They use auditions to do casting, which is like play the part. And what a great idea. And we said, well, why don't we get people to just play the part for every job? And why don't we use technology to make that possible at scale? And that's really, it's as simple as that. That's what we do at Vervoe. And I guess kind of optimistically, ambitiously, and completely naively, we said, oh, let's just start a company and do it. You know, this is great. We didn't look into it too much. And we built it. We put our own money behind it and never looked back and quit our jobs. And I think if we had complete, if there was no information asymmetry and we knew everything there is to know at the beginning, we never would have done it. We would have been like crazy. So you have to be a little bit crazy to start a company. And most people thought we were complete idiots, like what are you even talking about? But here we are. And then, there were many, many, many times along the way where we thought, oh my God, how are we going to get our first customer? How are we going to get the next customer? How are we going to retain everything? Like every doubt you can have, every question. But we've never stopped believing the conviction in the sort of the vision that we have, and in what the purpose and the mission and what we're trying to do has never waned. It's just that you get hit in the face, metaphorically speaking, so many times that you have, and there's a saying in startups that, are you having a shit day? Wait till tomorrow. Are you having a great day? Wait till tomorrow, because the next day is going to be different. So sometimes you just have to make it to the end of the day, and then you start again and something else happens. And to everyone we hire, every new hire, I say to them, listen, it's a roller coaster. This isn't it's not a party. It's going to be hard. There'll be some good days. There'll be some bad days. If you want it to be like all smooth, work at a corporate. Yeah. Don't do this.
No, for sure. 100%. The highs, it works like this. The highs are very high and the lows are just very low. There's no middle ground in between over there. It doesn't exist. It just doesn't exist. And now look, your naiveness is what kept you going. Was what helped you get started. The naiveness that you had, like, yeah, why not? Let's just start a company within HR technology. What do we care about? What do we know anything about it? Then let's go ahead and start. And that's the way how all credible stories, the journey start. And, you're 5 years already down the line. A few $1 million raised from VCs. You have 4,000 customers. Look how far you've come. I hope you've been able to, as much as the challenges are on a daily basis, I hope you've been able to pat yourself on the back and see how far you've come so far until now.
We don't do a lot of patting on the back. That's something that I think our employees, the team is probably, I need to do better at. I think they're aware of that. We push hard and we don't do a lot of patting on the back. We're not satisfied. And yeah, you've got to get the balance right. Sometimes it is important to celebrate and recognize that we've achieved stuff, but I think we've still got a long way to go to being where we want to be and having the impact that we want to have. And that's just how it is.
For sure. So you touched upon an interesting point, which we'll get to in a second. Well, I love what you said, like you had your North Star, or sort of have your mission. And your mission, you never wane from your mission. Yes, there were challenges. Yes, there was, you probably changed directions and pivoted the startup multiple times, but you never changed from the mission. The mission has always been the same. How important, I mean, I guess, so I'm assuming it's not how important, it's so important to obviously have that mission. Um, but coming for another company that's coming down, that wants to create that mission. Let's say whatever company they want to decide. Is there a framework? Do you give any suggestions you have for them to create that mission and to make sure never to steer away from the mission because there'll be multiple shiny objects along the way too.
Yeah, it starts from the problem you're trying to solve, and it doesn't have to be a sexy problem. Like there are startups in insurance and in logistics and all sorts of areas that are not, they're not sort of considered like necessarily exciting, but they solve a really big problem. And who are you solving that problem for, and what's the impact? What impact will that have on them? So that's kind of one part of it that's really, really important to get clarity on and understand why you're doing this. And then the other part of it is, why are you personally doing this? Because it's hard and you have to know. And so you need to care. What does that problem mean to you? And you need to care about that problem. When you put those things together, the problem and the impact that it has, not just on others, but on you, that is a really good starting point, I think, for defining a mission. The mission is not something that you write on your About Us page. It's about just being able to talk simply about the why. Why are we in this game? Whether it's to customers, to investors, to people you want to hire. And that is something that you draw on. So when we look at, should we build these features, we say, well, does it help us achieve? And it's not in some cliche sense. It's like, well, is it actually helping us? If not, it's a distraction. If it's not helping us achieve the goal, achieve our mission, it's a distraction. Is this customer dragging us in the wrong direction? Do these investors want to be associated with us for the right reason, or are they actually not on board with this? In which case, at some point, there'll be conflict. It's a good kind of guide to keep you on balance, keep you balanced and keep you on the right track. It's kind of like a compass. And we do come back to it quite a lot when we question things, if we're going down the right path.
Right. So I love that, having it as your compass, for every single type of question. So then take me back, like in the beginning times of your startup, you have your mission, you and David decide you're going to go ahead and start this. You both start plowing your own money. And then take me through some of the early challenges that you went through and how you push yourself forward to go work through them.
So we had this, so a couple of things. One is, we didn't know how to explain it. We didn't know, and part of that was because the category didn't exist, so there weren't any reference points. It wasn't like that we're making a toaster oven that heats warmer bread, and you can say, my toaster oven makes bread faster. It was like this thing of like the movie business auditions and this new way of hiring, and what are you even talking about? So that was kind of one thing that took us quite a while. And the other thing was, we naively thought, Atlassian, they had no salespeople, so we'll make software and people will just come to it and use it and buy it. And then we learned about this thing called user onboarding and all this kind of stuff, and maybe you need a sales team. It's pretty funny. And we kind of thought, you don't really need, we'll just make software that people can just figure out how to use. And of course, the UX and UI was terrible in the beginning. So we learned some stuff the hard way, and we got advice and we made mistakes and we spoke to customers and we sort of fumbled way through. And I think anyone who tells you that they didn't have a similar story, there's probably one of two options. Either they're lying, or they're a serial or repeat founder and they've made these mistakes before and they understand, or they've at a minimum worked in tech and built something before. But if you haven't, it's kind of like there's a lot of guessing, and there are only two variables: minimizing the amount of times you guess wrong, and the second is responding really quickly when you know you've guessed wrong, right, and adapting. And that's the job of a good founder. Will choose which guesses to make and then which really is kind of a simple way of saying which experiments to run, and then fail those experiments really quickly and adapt to the next thing. Nobody knows exactly what needs to be built and how to go to market and how to do all these things, especially when you're creating something new. There's no playbook. There's a guidebook, but you will quickly stray off the path. And so, someone said this to me really early on, someone who invested. He said, listen, I'm very clear that you guys have no idea what you're doing because you're building something completely new. I'm backing you to adapt quickly enough to the changes. And at the time, it seemed like some throwaway comment, but it's actually really true. And it's a really good way of thinking about the job of a founder.
So I love that. I'm paying you enough. I'm investing in you in order to adapt quickly to things that are changing. So how have you, as a first-time CEO, your first company, first-time CEO, how have you adapted along the way and your leadership style?
Yeah, I mean, a lot. I mean, first of all, so there are kind of two things that drive my behavior and how I allocate myself and how I sort of redefine my job. The first is the stage of the company. So when I look at what does the company need from me? Does the company need me to do marketing and get the word out there? Does the company need me to do a hands-on job? Or does the company need me to be a leader and someone who's driving strategy and evangelizing? Or does the company need me to raise capital? And these things change based on whatever. They can change based on company stage, but also within a certain stage, there are different times where I'm needed to do different things. But certainly in the sort of early days when you're trying to get product market fit, much less CEO and much more founder operator. And now kind of switching to more CEO. The second thing is, the second thing that drives how I allocate myself and my behavior is something less tangible, which is, well, how are people responding to me? Am I having an impact? Am I getting through?
Right.
Am I micromanaging? Do I need to back off? Do I need to let these people do? Or have I got a blind spot? Am I letting people kind of, are people in this area getting stale? Like off track? Do I need to now intervene? Like, what are the areas that I need to shine a light on and call out and say, we're not activating customers well enough. We need to focus on that because I've got the broadest vision of the whole company, more than anyone else that's in the weeds. So I need to kind of adjust myself and allocate myself in terms of how I'm interacting with people. Am I a pain in the ass? Am I getting in their way? Am I absent? And it's not easy. What do they want from me? And there's this Bruce Lee saying, be like water. And it's difficult for me because I want to do everything and I want to control. I'm probably an insufferable control freak, but really what the company needs from me is to be Bruce Lee, to be like water, to be where I'm needed and then disappear when I'm not, where I'm not needed, rather than to have a rigid or fixed sense of my job description, which is do all these things consistently. That's not what the company needs.
Right.
Sometimes they need me very heavily involved, and sometimes they need me to like give them an update once a week and set the direction. And that's, it's not easy. I don't get it right all the time. I mean, it's not easy, but I have to be a good judge of that.
Right. And here I'm thinking your delegation skills might be amazing.
Delegation is tricky art because you have to give people the sense that they can own something, and by owning it means that they can make a mistake.
Right.
And there's no safety net, and they can like absolutely go for it, but that they'll be supported. So it's not outsourcing. Right. But supported doesn't mean to do it for them. Supported means to give people clarity on what's expected, and then to respond in an appropriate way that's not necessarily the right when the outcome's different to what was expected. Yeah. And I say appropriately because sometimes it depends. Yeah. So delegation's not easy. It requires trust on both sides, and people also have different levels of direction that they need in order to do their best work. Some people struggle with abstraction and chaos, and other people are like, just tell me the goal and leave me alone. And people respond to different leadership styles. That's something that's good to figure out in the hiring conversation as well.
Right. I mean, not only the hiring conversation, but as a leader, to figure that out is a difficult process because that affects so many different ways. Team members, culture, how people work together. And how do you, to collaborate, to create that, I guess, that environment of collaboration between people and between teams is such first of all, so important, but it's difficult too, it seems like.
Yeah, it's challenging, and sometimes it changes over time. One person in particular who we hired, has progressed, started as an individual contributor and progressed into a leadership role, and that people evolve, and so starting out with someone who needs a lot of direction, and then over time, I'm lucky if they throw me a bone and tell me what's going on in their department, and so but that's great. That's great. So we both adjusted how we work together, and that's perfect. Yeah. So it changes over time.
So the question is, how can you assess for something like that before you hire them? So for example, like using a software Vervoe. And how do you assess? How do you use that to even assess? Someone, like, people are talking about culture fit, culture add, or to see if someone vibe, or to see if somebody able to do the job. How are you able to determine that? Even their own personal determination, or like you mentioned here, their work style. How could you determine that over there?
You can test for everything, and without nuance or without knowing the specific circumstances, what I'd say generally is that the best way to do that is to put people in relevant scenarios that are in context. Right. And I'll give you an example of why that's important. So people like to talk about abstraction, like attention to detail. Okay, good. The attention to detail of a librarian or of someone who is working in the federal election between Biden and Trump and counting votes is different. I had to just throw in a relevant example for Americans because everyone knows how important that is. In, say, the state of Georgia is different to the attention to detail I need in my job.
Right.
Okay. I need attention to detail. Okay. But at a different level, I need to pay attention to trends or to behaviors or to things, but not to like 1 vote, 2 votes. Okay. So attention to detail in abstraction means nothing to me.
Right.
But attention to detail for a startup CEO, that means something. Or for a vote counting election official, that means something. So test for that. Okay, in context. Now, in context doesn't mean physically at the booth where they count the votes, but it's a relevant scenario. So if you want to know how someone's going to respond under pressure, I'd say, well, what pressure? Pressure to design a logo quickly is different to pressure that your child is sick and you have to like run. That's like a totally different thing. That's not what you don't want them to like under that. Of course, they're going to be stressed when their child is sick. That's not. So what does pressure mean? So what does responding under pressure mean? And so, when we talk about like, okay, how is someone going to respond to a leadership style? Are they autonomous in how they work? That could be important, especially if someone's in a sort of junior leadership role. So, okay, well, what kind of autonomy do you expect them to have in that role? Do you expect them to like raise capital? No. Do you expect them to be able to run a transaction or do a performance review or manage a team? Yes. Okay, well, let's test for that, right? And so I always come back to context. I come back to what do you need them to do? What does 10 out of 10 look like in that job, at that company, at the time? Graphic designer at PwC is different to graphic designer at a Series A startup. Okay, the PwC designer is going to need to get stuff approved at committees. The startup will be like, why haven't you shipped it already? I don't even care that the thing's the wrong color. Fix it later. So different person probably, or different working style, different operating rhythm. So when someone says, what's a good graphic designer? I don't know. I mean, I know there's overlap. There's certainly some common skills, but the rest depends on the context. So anyone that's not testing in context, they're missing something. It's a proxy, right? They're not getting a good output. If you want a good output, if you want to make a great decision, and you want someone who's going to fit or add, that you need to put them in the context, the relevant context to your role and your company.
I love that. I love that. Now, is this something you're able to assess together with software? Because I've been seeing currently a lot of companies, what they do is sort of like a contract to hire type of thing, to able to assess for these certain things where before COVID, obviously, people were able to come to the office and try it out for like a month or two or something.
Yeah, I mean, I think anything that bridges the information asymmetry is great. And there's always a trade-off between confidence and efficiency. So if you've worked with someone for a year, you know almost everything there is to know about them. And right, but can you afford to have every employee come and spend 2 weeks in your company? No. Can you afford to? Right. So what we say, okay, we'll get you as close as possible. It's essentially a talent trial. But instead of coming and by the way, we, for our own company, have twice brought people in for a week.
Okay.
To spend. But we didn't have we had the time, and we were only looking at one candidate. But if you have 50 candidates or 5,000, you can't do that.
Right.
And you can't do that for every job, and you can't do that for every candidate that can't take a week off work, all these kind of things. 99.9% of the time, we're working in a world of constraints. And so what we're doing is saying, okay, you want to get as close as possible to having that person work with you. So we're recreating that audition concept or trial concept using technology online, in parallel, at scale, using data.
Right. Awesome. Awesome. I mean, and I'm totally with you. I'm a big believer in the sense of like, not just myself, but multiple people I've spoken to, beyond everything beyond the resume. The resume is only telling a certain story about the person. The person has so much more. It's not telling them capabilities. It's not telling them personality. It's not telling them so many other types of stuff. And each individual person is their own unique story, which you're able to communicate that to a potential company, or a candidate is able to communicate that to the company that they're applying for.
I go further and say sometimes the resume tells a misleading story. So you might look at a resume and say, this person has a gap in their employment, or this person worked at this company I've never heard of, or didn't go to a very good school. But what you don't know is that, they're a single mother, or they came from their first person in their family to go to college, or they couldn't afford this, or they couldn't, and it's like, well, so all these things, they mean nothing. You actually don't know, or they went back in the obstacle course to help the person get through, and that's not the resume. Yeah. So the resumes lie, and because the construct is flawed, and instead you want to understand, how is this person going to contribute to your company in this role? And there's so much more to that. So even saying, let's go beyond the resume, to me poses a problem. I say ignore I've never read the resume of any person we've hired in our company. I don't know what, I honestly, some of them, I don't even know where they worked. Like, I know the immediate job they have previously to us, but I can't tell you what they studied at college. Half of them I don't know, but I know a lot about them. Right. A lot about them. And I'll then take an interest, and we talk about the history sometimes after they've joined, but it's just not a relevant. I'm more interested in, what have they overcome? How can they contribute? How do they think? What is mindset? What are their skills? How do they apply themselves? How do they work with others? All these kind of important skills that are relevant. And the resume it's a a medieval document that when we used to have one profession, blacksmith, it was kind of like, okay, I'm a blacksmith and this is what I've done and where I've worked. Okay, that makes sense, as opposed to like carpenter or something. That's not how the world works today. Yet we're stuck. And personality assessments are the same. They're clinical, they were designed 150 years ago to check if you're a psychopath, basically. Mm-hmm. And then the military used them. And now they've found their way into employment. And the reality is that people with fundamentally different personalities can be great at the same job. Mm-hmm. But people will look for any signal, they will look for signals to give them confidence.
Yeah.
And they've been trained to focus on these things, resumes and interviews. And, it'll take as long as it takes, but we'll shatter that eventually. We'll break through it.
For sure, 100%. It's funny, like, about the human development. A lot of times, people think we're better than we actually are sometimes, and then we think we're worse than we actually are. Usually we fall out in the middle ground somewhere. We're in the middle level over there. And like you mentioned, we look outside ourselves, for that conviction, that positive conviction about ourselves. And the resume, you said, gives that to people. And people have to realize they're not their resume, and they get rid of the resume and showcase their real self. That's amazing. You mentioned before, like, being able to assess for skills, seeing other people's skills. People, and I love the fact that you actually use, your product within your own company. It's not just something you're selling, you're actually using it. You never looked at a resume in your company, you hired everyone from there. What would you just say are some, like, non-obvious habits that have made you better, a better person?
Me personally?
Yeah.
I think knowing when switching off is difficult. I'm not one of these productivity people who use all these note-taking apps and drink green juice at 4 a.m. and any of that. And partly because I don't believe in that, and partly because I work across time zones. So, and I have kids and all sorts of challenges. But I've stopped sleeping with my phone next to my bed recently, because I would wake up in the middle of the night and then get on my phone and start talking to the team in the US from 3 a.m. and then it quickly becomes 6 a.m. And then, so now I put my phone somewhere else, and that's how I sleep better. I think that's a non-obvious thing. And I also think it's really good, and this might sound like crazy talk. Most people take this for granted, but for me, switching off is really difficult in the day as well. So I find certain things that I do sometimes in the middle of the day, like mowing the lawn or going to the gym, where I'll actually just like be immersed in that activity and disconnect, even for an hour. I think if you're not a founder, you might not have that problem. You can disconnect more easily, but for me, it's very challenging. So, and it doesn't just help my mental health; it also helps sometimes to step away from a problem. I do puzzles a lot, and I discovered that I do puzzles with my son. I get stuck, and then sometimes I walk away and come back the next day, and all of a sudden I'm on fire. And so there must be something in the brain that helps achieve clarity when you step away from a problem. And I think in work, sometimes when I'm like really struggling to figure out a problem, I just let it go for a bit and go for a walk, and then and come back, and then I get clarity. Sometimes it sort of hits me. So they're the kind of things that I do. I don't really have great advice for people in terms of habit forming. I think it's unique to each person. But what I can say is that it's really important to find out what you need to do to stay positive, because when you're in a visible role, particularly a role like mine, you're a barometer and people read off your body language. And if you seem anxious or angry or negative, it impacts everybody. Right. So it's really important you certainly can't be fake about it, but it's important to keep a healthy sort of mindset.
I totally with you on that. Totally. I love that thing. I'm actually going to try it out tonight, because I definitely struggle with my phone aspect. I'm putting it in a different room. So, looking at, Omer at, 18 years old or 21 years old, just finished the army. He has a whole entire world in front of him. He could go back to Australia. He could stay in Israel, become a barista in Starbucks or some other place, or you have so many options. What message do we tell him?
Well, what I've always told myself is never die wondering. I've had this fear of sort of growing old and having. I was always happy to fail. I was never risk averse. I was always happy to do stupid, unreasonable things, and I was happy to lose money and all those kind of things, move countries, break things. But what I was never accepting of or tolerant of was to have regrets, to look back and say, I wish, should have, could have. Never. I had a huge anxiety around that. And if I felt that there was something that I really wanted to go after, it immediately induced anxiety of, not doing it. So I immediately felt compelled that I have to do it, otherwise I'm chicken shit, basically, and I'll never be able to look myself in the mirror. So that has always driven me, and that drove me to leave and relocate to Australia. It drove me to quit my job. All these kind of decisions that were pivotal, and there's a bunch of others throughout my life. It was this kind of this two sides of the coin, this like compulsion to do something, and this fear of like not respecting myself if I don't do it. And sometimes it's backfired spectacularly, but I've never regretted going after it. I've done it with a full heart.
I love that. He's saying just, like Nike says, just do it. Just jump right into it.
Just do it. But it's not for everyone. Some people crave stability and security, and I respect that. I've no issue. I can only speak about what drives me. And I think, thinking about my younger self, I would absolutely apply the same principle. Obviously, with the benefit of information, more knowledge, I might have done things in a different way, or made choices quicker or whatever, but stumbled through it in a different way. But I think the principles are the same.
Right. I love it. Absolutely love it. So, Omer, I want to thank you so, so much. I've learned a tremendous amount about this. Not just from what you just previously mentioned about just doing it, just jumping in, but, certain times it's okay to let naiveness, first of all, drive you. A lot of times, at least for myself or in general, it's like always about, okay, let me read this book and that book. Let me try to get all the answers before I begin. No, just go ahead and do it, which plays into naiveness, which plays into, break things and figure it out, and you'll fail and, learn quickly and then make those mistakes and you apply them again, which breaks into, learning about your team members and learning about your team and helping them become the best version and realizing that each person is their own individual story. And then it even goes further, to everything in our personal life and our professional life. So many things. I've learned a tremendous amount of lessons, and there's no doubt that so many people are going to benefit from this and learn so many incredible things too. So I want to thank you so, so much for joining us today.
My absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me. Thanks for taking time to listen to our story.
Pleasure.